Hi, Ian here. One of the things that I would really like you to do is that when you open one of any sort of map, is not just to behave like some tourist going through a new area or some technician that's just treating this as a purely technical problem. I want you to start thinking like a GIS analyst, like a true geographical information professional. Okay, so I want you to think about, what some of these shapes in the map might sort of suggest, what some of the problems that might emerge from by looking at the shapes of an area. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this cadastral map. Now, Cadastre, we go to this this button here to add vector layer, okay, and we go browse. And of course, you've extracted these files to your desktop or whatever, but it's in this Learn Practical GIS QGIS for Newbies Maps directory or folder structure. And we open this file called Cadastre. Now, Cadastre is a map of property ownership or land ownership or parcels, properties, whole bunch of sort of terms like that, and it might contain rating information, but they're basically, you'll hear me go on and on and on about the scale of a map relates to the scale of its collection rather than the scale of its display. Okay, now that's a very, very important point when you're dealing with GIS maps. However, there's exceptions to this. And one of the exceptions, not always, but quite often, are cadastral maps. Because they're maps of legal property boundaries, they tend to be surveyed in by professional surveyors. Now, this is not going to be the case everywhere. In rural areas, or the GIS technology hasn't quite settled in and settled into and so forth, yeah, you're likely to have maps that aren't as accurate, and yeah, that is quite true. But where you have an established urban environment, more often than not, the GIS maps there are surveyed GIS maps, so they relate to legal property boundaries. Okay, so that over, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about some of the shapes that we see in here. Okay, so this is an area of around about 100 square kilometres. I haven't actually measured it, but it's about 13 kilometres by around 10 at its extremes. So that would say, it's around, let's say, 40 square miles. Okay, so the first thing I see here, I see some very densely developed areas, right? Some urban areas. I see some less urban areas. Okay, so you've got some very small blocks, right? And you've got some perhaps rural residential blocks because you can see the outlines in here. And you've got some rural areas here, okay? So what are the sorts of issues that are likely to be going on with these sorts of areas? Okay, so in urban areas, you're going to have things like schools. Are there and census-related themes that relate to schools? Are there enough young people to support the schools? There's going to be the standard council or local government sorts of issues like, garbage collection routes and so forth. There's going to be infrastructure in the ground, such as water infrastructure, drainage infrastructure. Where is this telecommunications infrastructure? A whole bunch of issues like that. How does local government rate these properties? Who owns the property? They're the sorts of issues that are going to be going on. There's a whole bunch more, but that's just touching the edge. So when we get into here, into these rural residential areas, what are the transport sort of problems or issues that are going on, or what are the provision of services? How are services provided? Services, once again, such as schools and so forth, garbage services. Because the blocks are bigger, they're less intense development, and there'll be a whole bunch of sort of issues like that going on. And of course,